Hey, Dad. How are you?
Hey.
Well, it's 9 o'clock. I think we'll go ahead and get started. John, would you lead us in a word of prayer?
Let's pray. Father, we thank you for a day like today, one that we can see forever, one that we can look into your world and see the creativity. We thank you for the rain that we have, and Father, we thank you for the sun that we have today. We ask you for the blessing of our study this morning. Help us to learn from the judges, and we want to do it home. Not just to respond in a positive, but it will bring about faith, it will bring about action, and it will be good. We ask you for this help in Jesus' name.
Amen. So we're going to try to move through a little quicker today, try to get through these first couple of chapters so we can actually get into the character study of the major judges. So to bring you up to speed, if you haven't been to the class yet, Judges is a continuation of the book of Joshua. The Israelites are about 14 years into the conquest of the Promised Land. Under Joshua, they were a united campaign. I mean, all the tribes were together. They conquered a lot of the major cities. Now in Judges, they're back into their allotted territories, and they are continuing to push out the Canaanite people from their territory areas. They're taking their allotments that they were promised back in Joshua. So last week we got through a good portion of the first chapter. We see them making good progress. God is with them. Caleb is in the lead. They are taking the hill country. They are taking the foothills. They're struggling in the plains, but they're making progress. And then we ended last week with a battle at Debur, I guess is how you would say it. But so Caleb is making really good progress. He has the enemy on their heels. And we asked the question, well, why does he stop? Why does he slow the momentum? He should have just kept going. Well, he uses the opportunity to find a godly husband for his daughter, Aksa. So we talked about that a little bit. And then we were talking about the request that she had for Caleb. She's going to ask Caleb here. So we'll start here in verse 14 and 15. But he is just married. Caleb has married his daughter off. She's going to ask for a favor. And so we're going to talk about how that favor, it could be a model for prayer for us. But first of all, I want to think about, why is this story even in here? We're talking about all these battles and conquest of the Promised Land. And in the middle of it, we pause and we have this story about a father, daughter, husband, and a gift. I think it's in there because what we're going to see a lot in the book of Judges is vast contrasts. When we get to the very end of the book, we're going to see a father, a husband, a wife, but he doesn't fully give her the rights of a wife. It's his concubine, and she's treated very poorly. Then that story spirals into a whole civil war, and then a group of women getting treated even more poorly towards the end of the book. So the reason I think we have this story is because I think a lot of what Judges does is it shows us good, godly treatment of women. And we were talking earlier about Deborah. We're going to see a woman that is exalted up to a high leadership within the nation. We're even going to see a woman that is an unlikely hero of the battle. So that battle, when we get to the story of Deborah, it's a Kenite tent wife that is the hero of the battle. And so we're going to see, really, I think the writer is showing us good godly treatment of women to begin with, and then we're going to unfortunately get to this moral corruption, this moral decay, to the point where we're going to see some really foul treatment of the women within the nation of Israel. So just a little bit about her prayer, or not her prayer, but her request to her father Caleb. It says, one day she went to Othniel. Othniel's now her husband. He's the nephew of Caleb, and she urged him to ask her father for a field. And when she got off her donkey, Caleb asked, "What can I do for you?" And she replied, "Do me a favor, since you have given me land in the Negev, give me also a spring of water." Then Caleb gave her the upper and lower springs. So, as sort of a wedding gift, I assume, Caleb gifted Othniel these fields in the Negev. We talked about the Negev a little bit. It's that area to the south. It's very, very arid. It's very dry. A field is not going to do well without some springs. There's just not enough rains to make those fields fertile. So she goes to her father and asks her for springs. And so kind of just 5 points I wanted to make about how we see this example of her request to her father could be an example for us about how we can go to our father and make requests. Number one, she thought about what she wanted before she went to her father. She talked to her husband. They had decided that this would really bless them to have these springs. So she really thought about it. She thought about it carefully. We should go, before we go to our father in prayer, we should really think and put thought into what is it that we really truly need. Number two, she asked for help with her request. She enlisted the help of her husband to get these blessings from the Father. And so we do that. When we have something really on our heart that we want to take to our Father, we enlisted the help of our brothers and sisters to also pray for those things that we need, that we want God to give us. Number three, she went humbly, yet eagerly to her father. So she knows her role. She knows, and it was brought up. It wasn't generally traditional at this time in history for a father to bless a daughter. Normally, those things all went to the eldest son. So she went humbly, but she eagerly went to her father. And number four, she asked boldly for what she wanted. Matthew 21, verse 22 tells us, "If you believe, you will receive whatever you ask for in prayer." So we need to have that attitude of going boldly to the Father, to not hold back, to just let him know what we want, what we need. And number five, the last thing, she used past blessings as a reason to ask for more. She realized the spring was needed to further the good work of the field. And so we shouldn't be afraid to go. We shouldn't be afraid, I guess what I'm trying to say, is to go to the Father and ask for more and more and more. It's not that we're being greedy, but we're seeing how he has blessed us. And we know that if we ask him to continue to bless us with more, it's going to produce more. And so just like this field, the water, the springs, we're going to bless that field more. God will be ready to bless us with more for the things that he's already given us. So those are some things to think about when we think about prayer and using her request as a model. In verse 16, we we move on, and we are introduced to the Kenites. What do we know about the Kenites? What does it say there? Who are they? What people are they?
In-laws.
Moses' in-laws, his father-in-law Jethro, that was his people, his tribe. These were friendly people. These were semi-nomadic people. And so it tells us there in verse 16 that they are moving up from the city of palms, and they're moving in and living amongst the men of Judah. And so these are not people that were specifically identified as Canaanites that needed to be wiped out, to be pushed out. These are friendly. They showed kindness to the Israelites during the Exodus. So when they are in the wilderness, John? The Druze? The Druze. Okay. Okay. They're still here. Yep. Semi-nomadic, peaceful people, and they were known for their metalworking skills. So they were a good people to cohabitate with, to have amongst you, because they had some skills. They were the blacksmiths of the time. So if you're trying to build up a nation, they were a good people to have as your neighbors. Again, they were peaceful. They were kind to the Israelites during the Exodus. We're going to see this kindness towards the Kenites even continue. So when we get into the time of King Saul, in 1 Samuel 15 and verse 6, it says, King Saul instructed the Kenites to separate from the Amalekites before an attack. So they even showed favor towards the Kenites to say, get out of the way. We're coming through. We don't want to harm you. You're our friend. And so we show kindness. That hero of the battle, when we get to Deborah, she's a Kenite. She's married to a Kenite, and she's a tent wife. And she's going to be the hero of that battle. So they play a pretty good role in this story. And then it talks about they make progress. They attack the Canaanites living in Zephath, totally destroyed the city. They take Gaza, Ashkelon, and Ekron. And then it talks about, I'm in verse 19, the men of Judah continue, they take possession of the hill country, but they're unable to drive the people from the plains. And it says, because they had iron chariots. Okay? And that's the first time, or this is the first note that I want to make, where the language of Judges is, the writer of Judges is kind of writing in a way that he assumes you know the truth. He's writing in a way that you say, well, wait a minute. Is that really true? But he's expecting you to know enough about God's promises, know enough about God's faithfulness to know that the reason that they got bogged down and weren't able to defeat the people in the plains, it was not because they had iron chariots. It's because we're going to start seeing their faith and their belief that they can do this kind of dwindle. Okay? So, in fact, when back in Joshua 17, verses 17 and 18, Joshua, as he's allotting the land to the tribes, he specifically talks about these people with the iron chariots. And so he told them that the Canaanites, they have iron chariots, and he says, although they are strong, you can drive them out. So they're told by Joshua earlier that this is going to happen. You're going to run upon these people with these iron chariots, and have faith. They are going to be strong. They're going to be a mighty opponent, but you can drive them out. Why can they drive them out? Because up until now, God is on their side. we've seen God do miraculous things with the walls of Jericho and everything else. But they get to the point here when they get to the plains, the coastal plains, they are not able to drive the people out there. And then it also says in verse 21, the Benjamites also failed to dislodge the Jebusites that were living in Jerusalem. And it says, to this day, the Jebusites live there with the Benjamites. So we're starting to see the first pieces of failure here. We're starting to see that they are unable to do these things and push these people out. The Jebusites, it says they weren't able to push them out of Jerusalem. And the note that I had is for roughly 370 years until David captured Jerusalem in 2 Samuel 5. They were there. They were living amongst the Benjamites in Jerusalem. Let's think about that for a minute. They fail to drive these people out. These Jebusites, they continue to remain in Jerusalem. They're a thorn in the side of the people of Israel. Here's the question. Failing to address an issue in this current day and age, can you guys think of an example of something that maybe we as a nation fail to do that is going to cause repercussion for our future generations? That 370 years, hopefully not 370 years from now, but in this case, 370 years from now, David had to take care of this problem. I have a big one on my mind. Yeah, Steve.
Senior went into Iraq and got right up to the door of the gate and said, all right, we're leaving.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if he'd gone in to finish that job, that might have led to a completely different than leaving. And because he didn't go in and take care of, what was it saying?
Saddam Hussein.
Because he didn't take care of that.
Yeah.
Then that led us into the war in Afghanistan.
So a 20-year prolonged war. Yeah. So those are great examples. I was thinking more of our national debt. How we just keep kicking that can down and nobody seems to want to deal with it. Nobody wants to put themselves in a political position where they make the cuts that are necessary. Yeah, we are doing things, whether it be morally with our covenant of marriage, militarily, socially, and economically in this nation that are going to cause repercussions for future generations down the road. So, Steve?
This is going back on your scripture about having an iron chariot. When I read that passage, I think of tanks.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a military with tanks today, you can win with that. But if you don't, you're not going to win.
Yeah.
I think that kind of is along the same lines as having, back in those days, having an iron chariot, which you could camping on, really protect you.
Exactly. Those were the tanks of the day. And these people were coming down from they were choosing to stay in the hill country because they knew that those iron chariots could not go up into the foothills, into the hills. And so we're going to see a little bit later, it talks about the Danites. The tribe of Dan is going to be stuck in the hill country because they're afraid to go down. They have their allotment, their inheritance is land in the coastal plains. But they choose not to do what God says and take their allotment because they're afraid of these iron chariots, these forces that have these tanks, whereas they're just foot soldiers. And One of the commentaries I listened to, you illustrated this by talking about this as being, if we wanted to apply it today, it could be like technology. How much of us are afraid of the technology that our kids have? That this is just overwhelming. We can't compete with the technology. We can't compete with the things that our kids have at the access that they have in their hands. But God says, it's iron chariots. It's, you should not be afraid of those things that are sometimes causing trouble in our lives.
How many in this classroom? I can't touch the remote.
All right, verse 20, it goes back. Remember, we talked last week, Caleb was given victory over the city of Hebron. That was important because that was where the giants were when they first came in, and he reported the land, and they were so afraid because of the giants there. And so that Moses had promised that to Caleb, and he had victory there over the three sons of Anak. And then again, the Benjamites failed to dislodge the Jebusites from Jerusalem. So now, starting in verse 22. In verse 22, the house of Joseph, and so that's Manasseh and Ephraim, we're going to see here in verse 22 a story play out. Would somebody like to read 22 through 26?
When they sent him out Bethel, the spies saw him coming out of the city and said to him, "Show us how to get into the city, and we will see that you are treated well." So they showed them, put the city to the sword, to spare the man and his whole family. Then he went to the land Hittite, where he built a city and called it Luz, which is its name to this day.
Okay. So they're going to go into the city Bethel, formerly named, the Canaanite name for it was Luz. They send in these spies. So these spies unilaterally take it upon themselves to enlist the help of this man. Did they need this man's help? No, because verse 22 says the Lord was with them. The Lord's with you. You don't need any outside help from, especially somebody from the enemy side.
That's what's confusing for me when he came up against that one, all of that armament and everything. He couldn't, Did he leave them? But he wouldn't let them attack. He wouldn't let them attack them because they didn't have the equipment to overcome.
Mm-hmm.
Does he all of a sudden lose his power?
You talking about Caleb losing his power? Or,
The Lord.
oh, the Lord. Well, we're going to see the Lord is with them, but they're making decisions on their own. Just because the Lord is with you doesn't mean that you can't unilaterally choose to make wrong decisions or not go when he says, go and take this land, and then they look and see these iron chariots. So even though the Lord is with them still, they're making choices on their own about, you know what, I think we'll just stay here in the hill country. You know what, let's get this guy and get his help to spy out the city. So they get this guy's help, and he showed them the way into the city. And we think about this, everything that we know about treating people, we would say, well, this was a good thing, right? This guy helped them. He was friendly. They showed favor towards him, and they spared him. They spared him and his wife. And isn't that something good? Well, what happens? What was the consequence of that? He goes away off to a distance to another area, and he rebuilds a Canaanite city and calls it the same name. So what they have, because they have disobeyed God and did not do what he told them about putting everybody to death, they let this one guy live. He goes and establishes another Canaanite city. So it's kind of that idea about, I don't want to make the analogy like cockroaches, but it's like they scatter, and if you don't take care, you're going to have problems continue to do, because they're not following God. They're allowing, and we're going to see here when we get into verse 27, we're going to see major compromises. We're going to see major compromises with not doing what they're supposed to do to push these people out, to put them to the sword. They're going to start oppressing them into slavery, because they're going to think, well, this is a better way. Why kill these people when we can just make them our servants? And so they're starting to rely on their own thinking rather than following the will that God has for them. And so verse 27, we get another one of those. It says, but Manasseh did not drive out the people from Bethshan or Tanakh or Dor or Eblam or Midiado or the surrounding settlements. And then here I highlighted this. It says, for the Canaanites were determined to live in that land. Again, it's kind of like the author here is telling you their side of the story. That's not the reason that they didn't push the people out. It's not because the people were determined to stay there. Well, we tried, but they just were determined. They wouldn't move. He's writing it this way to tell us their faith in God is lacking. They're not following God. This is not the real reason that they didn't push these people out. These people were, yes, they were determined to stay there, but that's not the reason they weren't able to do it. They were not relying on God. And then again, I won't read all of this next section, but yes, when Israel became strong, they pressed the Canaanites into forced labor. So we see this pattern. Now it's not going in and putting everybody to the sword and destroying the cities. It's now we're going to go in and we're going to take the people. We're going to subject them, oppress them, make them our slaves. And isn't that better? Because now we have this labor force that we control. But then if you read in that section, it starts talking about not only are they taking them into slavery, but now they're just living among the people. So it's this slippery slope where they have turned away from what God really wanted them to do. And they have, in their own reasoning, have said it's better for us to make slaves of them, to now we're just living amongst them. 34, verse 34, it says the Amorites confined the Danites to the hill country, not allowing them for them to come down into the plains. And the Amorites were determined also to hold out in Mount Ayrs. So we see, again, that language. They're determined. We can't do this. They're too strong. They have iron chariots. The Danites, and I should show you that map, because this is pretty interesting. The tribe of Dan. Their allotted area was right here on the coastal plains. But what we're going to see is they're not going to take their allotted land. Later on, we're going to see in chapter 18, they're going to come up here and wipe out this peaceful town up here and take this land up to the north, the tribe of Dan. So later on, when we get to the story of Samson, this is where Samson is operating in this area. He's from the tribe of Dan. But in Joshua, their allotment is here. This is where they were supposed to go. But it says the Amorites confined them to the hill country. And we talked about the hill country kind of being over here to the east, the foothills, coastal plains. Even though they were supposed to take that area, they were not able to. In Joshua chapter 19, Joshua tells us that Dan's original allotment was in the coastal plains. And then later in Judges 18, we're going to see the tribe is still seeking a place to settle. So even the language there makes it sound like they're still and Judges 18 makes it sound like they haven't received their inheritance. The tribe of Dan is still looking for their inheritance. They're still looking for their piece of land. No, they were given their piece of land, but they failed to take it. They failed to push the people out. They were afraid of the iron chariots, and that's why they are stuck in the hill country. In Judges 18, verse 1, it says, "And in those days, the tribe of the Danites was seeking a place for their own where they might settle, because they had not yet come into an inheritance among the tribes of Israel." The writer writes that, but that's not true. They had their inheritance. They had their land, but they chose not to trust in God and to take the people that were living there and push them out. Any questions so far? I know I'm kind of going a little quicker than last week, but I want us to get to a good place. Yeah. Oh, I think it's I can get that answer for you. I want to say it's probably less than 100 miles. I mean, when we talk about all these towns are not but maybe 15, 20 miles apart. So yeah, they do. They send out, we're going to see later, they're going to look for land. They're going to send out spies and kind of scope out where is a good place where we won't come up against opposition. Where is a place that we can find some people that will be easy to push out. That's a good question. Was it part of? Yeah, I don't know if it was part of this tribe or not. But it's this area is Canaanites are still in that area, so they're gonna wipe out that city, Laish. Yeah. Do you know, Paul, as far as whose land that was?
No, but Israel today still are suffering because they didn't drive people out along the coast. Gaza and all that today. It's in the news every day.
Right.
So we're back to
Yep. We see, again, it goes back to those repercussions for future generations. Kicking the can down the road, not doing what the Lord intended them to do in that time, in that time span, caused great repercussions for the future generations. Okay, chapter 2. About 100 miles? Okay. So chapter 2, God has had enough of this. So God, it says, an angel of the Lord went up from Gilgal to Bochum and said, I brought you up out of Egypt, and I led you into the land that I swore to give to your forefathers. I said, I will never break my covenant with you, and you shall not make a covenant with the people of this land. But you shall break down their altars Yet you have disobeyed me. Why have you done this? Now, therefore, I tell you, I will not drive them out before you. They will be thorns in your side, and their gods will be a snare for you. Then the angel of the Lord once the angel of the Lord had spoken these things to all the Israelites, the people wept aloud, and they called that place Bochum. There they offered sacrifices to the Lord. Okay, so this section I titled, A Broken Covenant Has Consequences for the Side That's Not Faithful to Their Responsibilities under the Agreement. So here we have God coming through this angel of the Lord, God speaking to the people, and he basically chastises them and tells them, I swore my covenant. We entered into a covenant relationship, and you broke it. The Israelites broke the covenant. God was faithful. It was their side that broke it. One note that I had was kind of the idea that this rebuke from God that we see here in the first 4 verses of chapter 2 demonstrates a model for how we might process situations with our children when they are disobedient. So when God says, you knew the rule, you knew what was right, yet you disobeyed me. That's a way for us to process with and ask, why? Why did you choose to disobey me? What was the reason for your disobedience? And then, because you chose to disobey, here's the consequence. So we see that all here in these 4 verses. God going to his children, God telling them, you've done this. Why did you do this? Because you did this. Here's the consequences. And then we see that the children of Israel were remorseful. It ends there. That said, they offered sacrifices to the Lord. They wept aloud. They named the place Bochum, and which I assume means something like sad place or whatever. And they offered sacrifices to the Lord. So, I think the good thing out of this is that the people are truly, when they're confronted with what they've done wrong, they truly became remorseful, and they truly wanted God not to leave them. They still wanted God, and they wanted to worship God. But they had gone too far at this point. And what was the consequence? What did God say? Because of this, there has to be a consequence. What was it that God said that he would no longer do? Right. He wasn't going to continue to be with them. He was going to, since they weren't going to be able to continue to push these people out like they should have, these gods, these idols that they worship were going to be snares for them. They're going to get caught up. And we're going to see this going into chapter 3. They're going to get caught up in some terrible idolatry. We're going to talk a little bit about the pagan worship that these Canaanite nations participated in. It involved child sacrifice. That was part of it. Human sacrifice, child sacrifice, and how in the world did Israel get caught up in worshiping these pagan religions? They got caught up in it because of that slippery slope. They allowed themselves not to follow God's will, to push them out. They allowed themselves to slowly live amongst the people to the point where they're picking up their ways of life, they're picking up their culture, and then they're finally going to pick up their religion as well. And it's not going to be a good thing. All right, so we're down through verse 6 of chapter 2. Verse 6 through 10 is a flashback. When I first read this, and I read it several times, I was like, what? I thought Joshua was already dead. And he is. And I had to really look at the commentaries and like, well, why? But anyway, the narrator has put in here a flashback to Joshua's death. And so it says, after Joshua had dismissed the Israelites, they went to take possession of the land, each to his own inheritance. The people served the Lord throughout the lifetime of Joshua, and the elders who outlived them, and those who had seen all the great things that the Lord had done. Joshua, son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110, and they buried him in the land of his inheritance at Timnath-Heres in the hills of the country of Ephraim, north of Mount Gesh. And after the whole generation had been gathered to their fathers, another generation grew up who knew neither the Lord nor what he had done for Israel. So, real quick before we leave today, the reason I think they go back and they talk about the death of Joshua is to reinforce the idea that here is this generation, the generation of Joshua, the generation of Caleb, this first generation that did the will of God, that did the things that God wanted them to do. But then it says a whole nother generation grew up, and they knew neither the Lord nor what he had done for Israel. So what's the issue? What is the primary issue that we see here going forward? We have a generation that were faithful, that followed God, that knew God. And when we say that they knew neither God, it's not that they didn't know about Yahweh. It's not that they didn't know these stories of the crossing of the Jordan, of the Red Sea, of Jericho. But they didn't have it in their hearts. They didn't have Yahweh in their heart like that previous. So what's the issue? Why? What's going on here?
I think the small compromises in the generation after created bondage. Even though it was a small compromise of faith, it ended up the next generation. It's kind of showing its fruit and ended up being bondage.
Yeah. It is happening today. I think we make assumptions that we're raising our children. Yeah.
Of each generation. Well, that's kind of acceptable. We'll accept this. We'll accept that. And now the church is not going like it did in the very beginning because too many exceptions.
Yeah. The bottom line is they failed to raise that next generation to love the Lord the way at the deep level that previous generation had. And because of all these outside influences, because they did not drive these nations out, this next generation had to deal with those conflicts, those interferences that were, present. I think that we see that in this day and age. We may think that we're raising our kids in the church and we're raising them in truth, but they go out to school, they go out in the world, and they are bombarded with all different types of ideas that don't mesh with our belief system. And it
Talks about what talk about with Saul. He thought he was doing something you know, he kept the animal so he could sacrifice. And God was saying, I want obedience.